Have you ever seen a photograph that feels wrong? The kind that looks perfectly ordinary until your eyes linger too long? What if the blur in the corner isn't a flaw at all, but someone who was never meant to be in the picture? And what if that picture was taken the same day a young woman disappeared, her footprints ending right at the edge of the world? The story begins in Colorado in the summer of 1983. A black and white photograph marked June 17th, Echo Hollow. A man with a canvas backpack stands beside a wall of pale stone, his face turned toward the forest. Behind him, a faint smudge, almost human, caught mid-motion. At first, everyone assumed it was a printing defect, an issue with the exposure. It wasn't. The man in the photo was an instructor named Thomas Weller, leader of a university hiking group from Boulder. There were 9 of them in total, 5 men, 4 women, all members of the university's Alpine Club. They were on a training route through the mountain ridges south of Echo Hollow Quarry, a steep, half-collapsed canyon carved by quartz mining decades earlier. Locals had a saying, "Don't stay past sunset. The ground listens here." The students laughed. They were scientists, not believers. That night, rain began around 9. The group retreated into their tents. When morning came, one of them was missing, a 20-year-old geology major named Amy Woods. Her boots, her jacket, her backpack, all untouched inside her tent. The ground was soaked, the air heavy with mist. And there, in the mud near the quarry's rim, were footprints. Bare feet. Small, thin, the kind you'd expect from a teenager, not a grown woman. They led away from her tent and stopped abruptly at the edge of the cliff. No signs of a fall. No drag marks. Just gone. The official report called it an accident. The water was deep. They said she must have slipped. Divers searched for 3 days. Nothing. But buried in the archives of the Boulder Geophysical Department, there's a copy of Weller's field log. The last entry, written in smudged ink, "Heard something last night. Sounded like someone calling, but the echo came first." That note was never submitted to police. Years later, a second copy of the same photo surfaced in a geology newsletter. Except this time, the blur behind Weller wasn't just a blur. Under bright restoration light, the lab technician swore she saw eyes. 2 pale shapes, half submerged in the texture of the stone, like a face pressed against glass. For almost a decade, the story faded. Just another unsolved disappearance in the Rockies. Until the summer of 1991, when an experiment at Echo Hollow picked up a sound no one could explain. A pulse, a whisper, and a voice on tape that should never have been there. They called it the Echo Hollow signal. And that's where everything began. It had been 8 years since Amy Woods vanished at Echo Hollow. By 1991, the story had become nothing more than a rumor, a ghost tale whispered by students during mountain trips. But for Professor Charles Redwind, the hollow wasn't a myth. It was a mystery of physics waiting to be solved. Redwind was a quiet man, methodical, obsessed with sound. He led a small research group from the University of Colorado, 4 students, 1 field technician, and a van full of magnetic sensors, seismographs, and reel-to-reel recorders. Their goal: to measure electromagnetic anomalies reported by forestry workers near the abandoned quarry. Echo Hollow wasn't marked on tourist maps anymore. The old access road had collapsed, swallowed by trees. Even the locals refused to go near it after dark. But scientists don't believe in curses, they believe in data. On July 9th, they began setting up instruments along the canyon rim. The air was unnaturally still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. By noon, all devices were online. Then the first pulse came. Every 68 minutes, the magnetometers showed the same pattern, a clean, rhythmic spike that looked almost biological. A heartbeat. Redwind checked every connection, replaced every wire. The pulse stayed. And then, beneath the hum of the recording, one of the students, Evan Hale, froze. He pulled off his headphones and whispered, "There's a woman on the channel." Red Wind frowned. "You're picking up radio crossfeed. Adjust the frequency." But Evan shook his head. "No, she's whispering under the static. It's not radio." The team replayed the segment. First, nothing but low white noise. Then, faintly like breath through glass, "I'm not alone." The words repeated 6 times. Always the same tone, the same pause between each phrase, as if it wasn't recorded but responding. That night, the camp was restless. Animals had vanished from the forest. Every sound, the wind, the crickets, stopped. Even the air felt heavier, pressing against their ears. By morning, every single device had powered off. Batteries full, circuits intact. But the lights on each panel were dead. When they tried to play back the tapes, the reels jammed and shredded. Only one short segment survived. The same voice, now distorted, whispering the phrase backwards. "Enola am I? Enola am I?" Evan realized it was, "I'm alone," reversed. 2 hours later, a black SUV drove up the mountain trail. No markings. 2 men in gray jackets stepped out, showed federal badges none of the students recognized, and ordered the group to shut down the experiment. They took the tapes, the notebooks, and the backup drives. One of them looked at Red Wind and said quietly, "Professor, this site is under acoustic restriction. There are frequencies you don't want to hear." The team was escorted back to Boulder. Their funding was cut. The department sealed the report. Red Wind retired a year later, never speaking publicly about Echo Hollow again. But in the months that followed, strange things began happening on the campus. Cassette decks left running overnight would rewind themselves. Lab microphones picked up low rhythmic thumps, exactly 68 minutes apart. And every so often, someone claimed they heard a faint voice buried under the noise, repeating the same phrase, "I'm not alone." They called it the Echo Hollow signal. And though the government denied everything, one of Redwind's students would later smuggle out a single surviving audio file. It's only 5 seconds long. And if you turn the volume all the way up, you can hear her breathing. What do you do when science stops making sense? When every reading says nothing, but your body knows something is there, breathing, waiting, listening? 2 years after Professor Redwind's experiment was shut down, the mountains around Echo Hollow grew quiet again. Too quiet. In the spring of 1993, a group of 5 amateur cavers from Fort Collins Speleological Society arrived in the area. They weren't chasing myths, only mapping forgotten mine tunnels left from the quartz rush of the early 1900s. They had permits, lights, ropes, and a list of coordinates copied from county records. But Echo Hollow wasn't on any official map anymore. Their leader, Mark Hensley, logged the entry at 10:43 a.m. April 12th. Entering lower shaft, no structural collapse visible. Air dry. Temperature stable. Mild echo distortion. That distortion was the first sign something was wrong. When they spoke, their own voices came back delayed. Not seconds later, but instantly, overlapping, as if someone else repeated them a fraction too soon. It wasn't the shape of the tunnel doing it. It was deeper. At 50 meters, they found the old passage blocked with rockfall. Hensley, stubborn and careful, ordered a slow clearing. Behind the debris, the air shifted colder, denser, like the pressure in a closed room. They crawled through one by one. On the other side was a man-made corridor, hand-carved, and on the wall, carved with a knife into damp stone, were words. "Don't call IT here's." The letters were uneven, scratched over years, layers of rust and soot embedded in each groove. Beside it, smaller, almost erased, "Stay silent when it moves." They stood there for nearly a minute, the beam of a flashlight trembling across the words. Then one of them, Eli Torres, collapsed. No warning, just dropped. His pulse raced, but he wasn't conscious. They carried him back to the surface. When he finally woke, his ears were bleeding slightly, his pupils fully dilated. He kept whispering, "It's still down there. The sound's still going." Doctors later said he suffered a stress seizure caused by oxygen deprivation. But the cavers insisted their meters had shown normal levels. No gas, no radiation. Nothing. Over the next week, Eli reported hallucinations. A constant low hum at the edge of hearing, rising and falling like breathing. He couldn't sleep. Claimed he could hear voices when water ran through pipes, when the fridge turned on, when the city lights buzzed. On the 7th night, he cut the power in his apartment, all of it, and told his roommate, "Now I can finally hear it clearly." No one knows what he meant. He was admitted to the university hospital with acute auditory hallucinations and spent months under observation. The doctor's notes are still sealed. Meanwhile, the team's radio logs, the tapes of their descent, every call, every minute underground, were sent to the University of Colorado archives for review. Weeks later, the box came back empty. Official explanation: misfiled material. Unofficially, the archivist who signed the receipt was transferred 2 days later and never returned to campus. After that, Echo Hollow became a place people simply didn't go. Hunters avoided it. Campers drove the long way around. Locals began saying the air there felt heavy, that it listened. And yet, in Redwin's old notebook, a copy leaked years later, one page appears torn, with only 2 words remaining at the bottom, written in shaky pen. Carved first. Who answered? Nobody knows who or what left those words on the stone wall. But if you walk near the sealed mine today, the echo carries strangely, comes back slower, lower, almost like it's thinking before it returns. And if you whisper your name into the hollow, the silence that follows feels alive. By 1996, the Echo Hollow story was a ghost no one wanted to chase. The quarry was sealed, the research buried, the locals silent. But one man, Daniel Crane, a journalist from the Denver Tribune, decided to dig anyway. It started as a background piece on unsolved disappearances in the Rockies. Routine work, until he stumbled across a file that shouldn't have existed. Case hashtag 84-217B, missing, Amy Woods. The file was thin, barely 20 pages, but one name caught his attention: Thomas Weller, the hiking instructor who'd led Amy's group. The report claimed all 9 members were in camp the night she vanished. Yet, in the margins of a secondary witness statement, someone had written in faded pencil, "Heard laughter, splash in water, 2213. That page wasn't part of the official record. It had been folded, smudged, and left unfiled between 2 blank sheets. Crane tracked Weller down to a small apartment in Colorado Springs. The man was 60 now, gray and anxious, chain-smoking through the interview. At first, he denied everything. Then, almost trembling, he said, "She didn't just fall. We heard it calling. Not her voice, something else. And when we turned toward the sound, it stopped. But it remembered us." Crane asked, "Who remembered?" Weller didn't answer. He just whispered, "They came after. The ones in gray coats. Told us to forget. But it still walks." 3 days later, Weller was dead. He'd fallen from his 4th-floor balcony. Police called it suicide. No signs of struggle. But in his apartment, on the desk beside an unlit cigarette, Crane found a notebook. On the last page, written in shaky blue ink, "Footsteps in the hallway. It remembers. I shouldn't have spoken. That line never left him. Crane filed the piece as a human interest article, but off the record, he kept digging. He submitted Freedom of Information requests, contacted Redwind's former students, even tracked down Eli Torres, the caver who'd collapsed underground. Every single source gave the same warning. Don't go near the hollow. Here's when you talk about it. The paper refused to publish his follow-up. They said it read too paranoid. So Crane started a private log, a timeline of everything that had ever happened around Echo Hollow. Disappeared hikers, dead scientists, sealed reports, and one sentence connecting them all, written across the top of the first page in red pen. Don't call it here's. The discovery came from a place no one expected, a high school basement. In February of 1997, Martin Cole, a physics teacher in the small mountain town of Silver Creek, Colorado, was cleaning out an old storage room beneath the gymnasium. The building dated back to the 1940s, a leftover from wartime civil defense programs. Behind a stack of rusted desks, Cole found a metal box sealed with wax and a faded military tag. It took him nearly an hour to pry it open. Inside were rolled maps, typewritten pages, and a single label stamped in red. Sector 12. Acoustic Instability Zone. The maps were detailed, topography, geological layers, seismic grids, all centered on one region, the canyons surrounding Echo Hollow. Across the margins, typed in uneven ink, were strange operational notes. Terminate all tests if amplitude exceeds 74 dB. No verbal communication allowed within the perimeter. Do not remain longer than 3 hours. No agency name. No signature. Just coordinates. 4 of them. Marked with small black circles and the words Phase 2/resonant field. Cole didn't know what he was looking at, but he knew it wasn't something a school was supposed to have. He brought the box to the local sheriff's office. That's how Sheriff Ben Raines entered the story. Raines was a pragmatic man, a veteran who'd seen too many wild conspiracy calls. He laughed at the label, called it a Cold War ghost story. But something about the precision of the maps bothered him. He contacted an old friend, Dr. Gregory Yates, a retired geologist from the State Survey, and the two decided to check the coordinates themselves. The first site lay northeast of the quarry, deep in the Pine Valley. They hiked out early in the morning, carrying a handheld magnetometer and a portable acoustic sensor. The ground was frozen, the wind dead still. Raines noted how quiet the woods were. Not silent, but waiting quiet. The instruments spiked at random intervals, 20 to 30% above baseline. The compass needle drifted almost 30 degrees off north. At the second site, a ridge overlooking the hollow, the air seemed heavier. Yates set the acoustic meter against the rock face, and the readings went wild. A deep oscillation pulsing at 19 hertz, below human hearing. Raines put on the monitoring headphones to listen directly. He expected static. Instead, he heard a click, then a faint, drawn-out breath, like someone exhaling inside stone. Then, just under the frequency threshold, a whisper. Can you hear it now? Raines tore the headphones off, pale and shaking. Yates hadn't heard a thing. When they replayed the tape, the moment was silent, blank. A gap of perfect, impossible quiet. The machine had registered input, but there was no sound on the recording. Back at the station, Raines tried to file an incident report. Halfway through, the lights flickered, and every radio in the room emitted the same low hum they'd heard in the canyon. He shut them off. That night, he told his wife he was going to the hospital, headaches, ringing in his ears, trouble focusing. The doctors diagnosed exhaustion. He was placed under observation. 2 days later, he vanished from his hospital room. No broken window, no forced door. The security cameras had frozen at 3:14 a.m. For exactly 68 seconds. the same interval recorded years earlier in Redwin's experiment. The only thing left behind was his notebook. On the last page, in unsteady handwriting, "It doesn't need to be called anymore. It's already listening." After Rain's disappearance, the state police sealed the file. The box and its maps were never seen again. Martin Cole was advised to avoid public statements and later transferred to a district 3 counties away. But a copy of one map survived, the one Rains had folded into his coat pocket. Across the top margin, someone had penciled a line that didn't appear on any other version. Sector 12 equals Echo Hollow. If heard, evacuate immediately. No one did. By autumn of 1997, Echo Hollow had become more than a name on an old map. It had become a pattern, one that no one wanted to admit existed. It started with a tourist from Denver, found sitting upright beside his parked truck near the forest entrance. Eyes open, pulse slow, completely unresponsive. Doctors called it catalepsy, a rare neurological freeze like the body refusing to wake. 2 days later, he simply stopped breathing. Before he died, he whispered 6 words to the nurse on duty. Deeper than sound, lower than silence. It waits. 3 days after that, a school bus driver from Silver Creek failed to arrive at the depot. The bus was found idling on the side of the road, door open, headlights still on. He was sitting behind the wheel, the same frozen stare, the same faint heartbeat. He never regained consciousness. Then came a geography lecturer from the local college. He'd taken a small group of students to study the canyon formations near Echo Hollow. According to the survivors, he stopped mid-sentence, turned toward the quarry, and simply went still. One of the students said it felt as if the air folded inward, like all the sound had been sucked out of the valley. They called it the quiet minute. Every bird stopped, the wind, even their own voices. When the noise returned, the professor had collapsed. Within 2 weeks, there were 7 recorded cases, all traced to the same region. Each victim had visited the hollow within 72 hours of their episode. All showed identical symptoms: low pulse, shallow breath, unresponsive pupils, and faint tremors, exactly 68 minutes apart. The local hospital filled with rumors. Nurses said the patient's monitors sometimes flickered in rhythm. A slow thumping pulse, steady and mechanical, like a heartbeat amplified underground. And when the speakers of the hospital's intercom picked up static, a pattern formed, a repeating low-frequency hum at 19 hertz. No external signal, no transmitter, just there. By November, residents began whispering about the Day of Silence. They claimed that once a year, usually around the winter solstice, the entire valley fell into unnatural stillness. Engines stalled. Radios went dead. Dogs refused to bark. The air itself felt heavy, as though filled with invisible pressure. And when the silence broke, a second later or an hour, no one could agree. Some swore they heard a heartbeat echoing from beneath the ground. Radio engineers in Denver detected something, too. A persistent background hum, faint but measurable, repeating in cycles that matched the victims' episodes. The pattern was clear: 68 minutes, 6 seconds apart. Experts blamed faulty equipment. Locals said otherwise. They said the hollow wasn't quiet because it was empty. It was quiet because something down there was listening. By the summer of 1999, the Echo Hollow files had been buried again, closed, sealed, forgotten. But not to everyone. A new group of students from the University of Colorado's Department of Geosciences arrived that June to conduct a simple topographic survey. 6 of them, 3 men, 3 women, led by graduate assistant Victor Hanley, bright, ambitious, and too young to believe in curses. Their task was routine: chart ground deformation along the ridge, measure soil conductivity, and log coordinates for an upcoming mining review. They set up camp half a mile from the southern edge of the old quarry. The first week went perfectly. Then the nights changed. On July 11th at 2:17 a.m., one of the students, Lydia Park, 22, woke to a faint glow outside her tent. Not firelight, not a flashlight, a soft, pulsing radiance moving through the ground itself, as if something beneath the surface was breathing light. It shimmered between the roots, vanished, then appeared again a few yards away, tracing a slow curve toward the lake. She tried to wake her roommate, but by the time anyone stepped out, the glow was gone. They laughed it off. Nerves, exhaustion, maybe reflected starlight. Lydia didn't laugh. 2 days later, during morning calibration, one of the magnetometers began spinning on its own. Hanley tapped it, checked the batteries, everything normal. Then he noticed the air felt heavier again, the same muffled pressure others had described years before. Moments later, Evan Brooks, another student, suddenly dropped his clipboard and whispered, "Do you hear that?" The others heard nothing. Evan turned pale, clutching his ears. He said there was a low voice, not in his head, but under it, whispering rhythmically, almost testing the sound of his breath. That night he vanished. His boots were still by the tent flap, his notebook left open with only one sentence written across the page. "It didn't take me. I stayed silent." The search lasted 2 days. At dawn on the 3rd, they found a line of prints leading from camp down to the water. Not bare feet, not exactly. The marks were rounder, deeper at the heel, as though something had pressed upward from below rather than stepping down. The tracks ended right at the shoreline. No drag marks, no sign of struggle. The expedition ended that morning. Their report to the department was short. Equipment malfunction. Fieldwork discontinued. All recordings and photos were sealed under administrative review. No one in the group spoke publicly again. But 3 months later, in Boulder, Lydia Park jumped from her dorm balcony. She left a single note taped to her window. For words, written in trembling graphite. "He was right behind me." The handwriting trailed off halfway through the last letter, as if she'd heard something, and turned. By the time the next witness spoke, Echo Hollow was no longer just a rumor. It was a warning no one wanted to repeat. In 2000, retired Sheriff Walter Briggs self-published a slim memoir called The Quiet Valley. Most readers dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man chasing ghosts. But a few pages in, it changed tone from nostalgia to confession. Briggs had served as sheriff of Silver Creek County for nearly 20 years. In his notes, he described what he called the ringing nights. Between 1989 and 1995, every July, he'd hear strange metallic noises echoing from the northern forest, like hammers striking hollow steel far off in the dark. He wrote, "The sound didn't travel through the air. It was in the ground, like the trees themselves were ringing." One night, he hiked out toward the fire lookout tower 2 miles east of Echo Hollow. What he found didn't make sense. The tower was still standing, but the pine tree supporting its base was split from within. Not burned from lightning, burned outward, as if heat had expanded from the core of the trunk. The wood was dry, chalk-white, but untouched on the outside, and all around the base, the soil glittered faintly in his flashlight beam. Later testing revealed traces of antimony, a rare metal used in amplifiers and military alloys, never naturally present in that region. Briggs reported the finding to the State Forestry Office. No reply. 2 weeks later, men in plain suits visited his home, asked a few quiet questions, and took the soil samples for verification. He never saw them again. The final chapter of his book mentioned a man named Harold Deacon, a communications engineer working maintenance on the state's emergency radio lines near the hollow. Deacon had contacted Briggs in 1998, claiming he was picking up unregistered transmissions along the mountain band. When Briggs met him, the man looked exhausted, shaking, almost afraid to speak. He told him, "There are 3 of them. One whispers, one calls, one listens." Briggs asked, "3 what?" Deacon just stared at the forest and said, "They're not people, they're places." A week later, Deacon's truck was found abandoned near the service road. Keys in the ignition, headlights on, driver's door open. Inside, his work log ended mid-sentence. Signal constant, moving between points. No voice this time, only. The rest of the page was scorched black. Briggs's book never made it to stores. Most copies were destroyed in a warehouse fire before shipment. Only one survived, the author's own, recovered from his home after he passed away in 2002. The last line he ever wrote reads, "If you listen long enough, it starts listening back." December 2001. The winter that silenced the mountains. 3 amateur researchers, Michael Lorne, David Keller, and Laura Finch, arrived at Echo Hollow without permits, equipment, or any official backing. They weren't scientists, just believers. Each had read fragments of the missing reports, Briggs's notes, the rumors. They wanted proof. Something they could see, record, bring back. Their journals were found weeks later, water-damaged, half-burned at the edges. From those fragments, investigators pieced together their final hours. The first entry, written by Laura, reads, "We found the shaft at dawn. Ice over the mouth, smooth, like glass. The air coming out is warm." They descended 20 meters on rope into the old mining corridor, the same one sealed decades earlier. Inside, their voices seemed to double, echoing in ways that didn't match the tunnel. When Michael whispered, "Test, 1, 2, the echo replied before he finished. It was ahead of them. Further in, the air thickened. Their flashlights dimmed, though batteries were full. Laura wrote, "It's so quiet I can hear my own blood in my ears. The silence isn't absence. It's a tone, like the world holding a single note." They reached a circular chamber, its walls polished smooth as glass. In the center, a shallow depression, maybe 3 meters across, perfectly round. David tossed a pebble in. No sound when it landed. Just a hiss, soft, wet, like steam escaping. Michael decided to lower a line and measure depth. The rope slid down easily, then went slack. He leaned forward and vanished. No fall, no scream. Only that same hissing, now sharper, as though something below had inhaled. Laura and David ran toward the opening. The air pulsed once, a low vibration that rattled the lamps. Then David clutched his head, shouting, "Stop it! Stop the sound!" He smashed his flashlight, pressed his palms against his ears, and screamed until his voice broke. Then silence. When Laura looked up, the beam of her remaining light caught only dust. David was gone. Her final entry. "The noise isn't outside anymore. It's inside my chest. Every heartbeat feels like it's answering something. When you speak, it listens. When you're silent, it moves." 48 hours later, rescue teams found Laura standing barefoot on the frozen surface of the lake above the hollow, staring down through the ice. Her pulse was steady. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. When she finally spoke, a week later, her first words were barely audible. "It knows the rhythm of breathing." The cavern beneath Echo Hollow was sealed for the last time that winter. Concrete poured, tunnels collapsed. But no one ever found Michael or David. And in the stillness under the ice, something faint still moves, waiting for sound. By 2003, Echo Hollow no longer appeared on any state registry. The access roads were fenced, the tunnels filled with concrete. Government reports listed the site as geologically unstable. But people who lived nearby knew better. They watched as unmarked trucks moved through the valley at night, loaded with steel drums and sealed crates. For weeks, helicopters circled low over the canyon. Then, just like that, silence again. No one ever said what they'd buried under all that concrete. But the ground hasn't been still since. In the years that followed, a quiet term began circulating in scientific circles: Quarry syndrome. It described a rare psychological condition observed in surveyors, miners, and sound engineers exposed to low-frequency acoustic fields. Symptoms included auditory distortion, disorientation, and a persistent belief that the silence was responding. Official papers framed it as a cognitive malfunction caused by infrasound exposure. Unofficially, some of the researchers who coined the term had worked in Colorado in the early 90s. At Echo Hollow, the valley is closed now. No trespassing, no hiking trails, no coordinates on GPS. Just a blank patch of forest and a frozen lake with no name. Still, every year on June 17th, the anniversary of Amy Woods' disappearance, the same reports surface. Radios lose signal. Engines refuse to start. Cell phones drain in minutes. And those who live close enough say that, for one brief moment before dawn, the air grows dense, heavy, and utterly still. Some say they've heard it, a faint whisper coming off the water, so soft you can't tell if it's real or just your mind completing the silence. But when you listen closely, it shapes itself into something that sounds like a name, your own. The state denies everything. The files are sealed. But in the archives of the Boulder Tribune, one torn note from journalist Daniel Crane remains, scribbled in red pen across the margin of his unfinished article. Don't call, it hears. And so the story ends where it began, with a photograph, a vanished girl, and a place that should have been quiet. Because whatever was buried under Echo Hollow never stopped listening. If you ever stand by the lake and the world goes quiet, don't call. Because it will hear.